Hey y'all, I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we're bringing you another episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? So today's topic is a tough one. POA, a power of attorney. When do we need these? Why do we need these? And how do they actually need to be signed and used? So first of all, let's define what a POA is. So a power of attorney is basically giving someone the right and ability to be able to sign on your behalf. So those types of documents, because they're legal documents, they need to be wet inked. So we're talking about pen actually touching paper, no DocuSign, no dot loop. It cannot be done via a computer. The other big piece is it has to be notarized. So remember, a notary uses an official seal to say that you stood in front of them while you actually signed the document. The other thing with the POA is you need to make sure you have all parties involved sign the document. So it can't just be one-sided. So you can't speak for someone by signing the document. Essentially, that would be like me giving my brother permission to buy my house, but not having him sign the document saying he acknowledges. So another pro tip here is when you're talking about POAs, they can be used in a couple of different situations. The big one is estates, and then we see it a lot with the wholesaling world. So let's tackle estates first. So estates can be set up whether the person is still living or the person is passed. So when we're talking about the estates, sometimes these POAs are created in advance. So let's say that somebody's health is starting to decline. You might go ahead and give somebody the power of attorney to make financial decisions on your behalf. So let's say it's the sale of a home. You would give maybe one of your children the rights to sell your house because you are no longer going to need it. You've been moved into a different type of assisted living facility, living with family and things of that nature. The other situation could be somebody has now passed away and you have to determine what you're going to do with real property. So in this case, a home. You have a POA set up, somebody that is power of attorney with the ability to be able to sign off on that actual sale. So when you're getting into a situation where you have lots of family members, because let's say, for example, you have 5 kids, and so the estate is now being passed on to this group of people. One of the big things that we see that people forget about is if each of these kids are also married, the marriages are also involved. So let's say you have 5 kids, everybody's married. That's now 10 people that have to sign all the various documents. So in a lot of cases, especially with larger families, you might have somebody as the executor of the estate, and they could also be a POA for all of the remaining family, meaning they are signing, and it could be 10 times, but at least it's one person who's signing for each and every representative of that family unit. So there's a couple of different layers, and as I would say with anything legal, remember, I'm not an attorney. You want to get your legal advice from somebody who is licensed to practice law. So always defer to an attorney, specifically an estate attorney in this case. So another area that we see POAs kind of exist is in the wholesaling and entity seller world. So in some cases, you might have almost like a multi-layered contract situation. So let's say there's a limited listing agent who plugs something into MLS, and they're doing that on behalf of a wholesaler or an entity seller. First of all, that listing agent has to have an agreement with the wholesaler. That's how we put this in MLS. The other part of the situation is that the wholesaler also has to have a contractual relationship with the actual owner of the house. Now, these folks can still be alive and well, but let's say they don't want to have any involvement in showing traffic or being involved in the everyday kind of answering of questions, sale of the home. So the wholesaler is signing things on their behalf. So they are making these legal decisions for them. There has to be a POA between the entity and the actual homeowner. So red flag alert, if you come across a listing and they cannot produce a POA of some kind, so again, wet inked and notarized agreement, then they cannot legally act on behalf of those sellers. Now, they still might be passing along information and helping facilitate that contract, but at the end of the day, the sellers would actually have to be the signing parties unless the POA is in existence. So in this situation, definitely loop in your closing attorney if there's any red flags or questions that you might have in regards to the legitimacy before you get in contract, and especially before money changes hands. So just know POAs can be very powerful. They can be handy to have. You definitely want your estates to be set up with a designated person being able to make a decision on behalf of you and loved ones, should that happen. And then if you're ever working with limited listing situations and somebody who is representing as a wholesaler or an entity, you want to double check that all of that paperwork is on the up and up. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'm Laura Richardson with Relevate, and we'll see you on our next episode.